This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
USAID head pushes for humanitarian aid access to Tigray. At least 25 people killed in attacks in Nigeria's Kaduna state. And the WHO calls for a halt in the use of COVID-19 vaccine boosters before the end of September. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. In business news, Southern African Development Community's economic growth rate contracted by 4.8% in 2020. And in sport, Ruth Chemtai makes history in Tokyo as she becomes the first female to win Uganda an Olympic gold medal. Well, the head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Samantha Power, has expressed concern about the growing number of displaced people in regions surrounding Tigray. The U.S. has been pressing Ethiopia's government to allow more humanitarian aid into the Tigray region, where hundreds of thousands of people are reported to be facing famine in what is being described as the world's worst hunger crisis in a decade. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia has the details.
Ethiopia's Tigray region has been experiencing a 9-month conflict. The conflict has made thousands of people in the region settle at IDP camps. Many of the displaced people lack basic necessities such as food. This has led to a growing humanitarian crisis in the region.
The U.S. is watching with great alarm as a conflict that began in Tigray is now beginning to spread. We now estimate that there are roughly 76,000 internally displaced persons in Afar and 150,000 internally displaced persons in Amhara after TPLF military expansion into neighboring provinces.
The ongoing conflict in Tigray has made it difficult for agencies such as USAID to offer humanitarian assistance. But USAID's head, Samantha Power, has requested the Ethiopian government to ease a blockade of humanitarian aid to the region. According to Power, just 10% of targeted aid has reached the region since mid-July.
As of 2 days ago, 153 trucks with relief items have been able to enter Tigray. So in that period between mid-July and August 2nd, according to the UN, what were needed was 1,500 trucks, and the number of trucks that rolled in and were able to pass was 153. That's 10%. This morning, I visited a local staging center for USAID's food aid, not far from the capital. Warehouses were full of wheat and lentils and split peas, and trucks lay idle in the mud because deliveries had been backed up for weeks due to ongoing blockades.
More than 5 million people need humanitarian help in Tigray. Power has called for a ceasefire and dialogue to allow better access to the region. Enoch Sekolia, CGTN.
Well, for more on that situation, we're joined by CGTN Kirum Chala, who is in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, and William Davison, a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Thank you so much to you both for joining us. Kirum, let's start with you. Aid agencies are expressing concern about the growing number of displaced people in regions surrounding Tigray. What can you tell us about that situation in the Tigray region and its surrounding areas?
So, Hannah, due to the escalating tensions and conflict from the Tigray regional state to Afar and the Amhara regional state, people are indeed being displaced, and they are now under the aid services hands, because these people need basic necessities, including food and shelter, as they left their localities. Unfortunately, war in different locations seems to be continuing at the moment, and the number of these IDPs can be increasing in the next few days, and that's what the UN is also contemplating. You should understand, however, that there is a positive news. We're hearing that the more than 150 trucks stuck between the border areas of the Afar and the Tigray regional state are now able to cross the border, and aid is being delivered in the Tigray regional state. Although there are still demands from the UN side that at least 100 trucks full of food need to be crossing the border every single day to perhaps mitigate the problem of humanitarian catastrophe, according to them. But all in all, we must understand that the situation in the Tigray regional state, all bordering towns between Afar and them, and the Amhara regional state is still volatile, and a solution needs to be found other than war. That's what people are saying.
Well, Guillaume, I'll be back with you in a moment. Let's turn to you, William. How can the government and international agencies work together to combat the famine in Tigray and the surrounding areas?
The difficulty here is the ongoing conflict and some of the political dynamics related to that. Essentially, since the federal government withdrew its administrators and its forces from most of Tigray, we've had very heavy federal government restrictions on aid access. That appears to be a continuation of an attempt by the federal government to continue to put pressure on the Tigray leadership even after withdrawing from the region. And so until there is some resolution, some way of ending this conflict, then it's going to be very hard to sustainably address the humanitarian situation. We've only seen a small proportion of the food aid convoys being able to get into Tigray since that federal withdrawal. And one of the key issues here is the Western Tigray issue, where Amhara region has claimed territory that used to be part of Tigray, and the federal government is backing that position and reclaiming that territory in Western Tigray is a key objective of the Tigrayan leadership. And that is one of the reasons that they've launched these offensives into Afar and Amhara region, as well as an attempt to put pressure on the federal government to remove the blockade on Tigray.
Guillaume, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to be back with you, William, in just a moment. Guillaume, the Prime Minister is expected to speak to the media later on today. What have you been told is on the agenda of that meeting, and what do you expect out of that briefing?
Well, as you've said, a briefing is scheduled in about a couple of hours from now. We don't really know what the subject matter that the Prime Minister or anyone who is going to deliver the presser is going to deal with. But we understand, or we can guess that the press conference might evolve around the situation in the northern part of the country, and also the humanitarian efforts the country is trying to exert in that regional state, also in the Afar and Amhara regional state. Samantha Power, administrator of the U.S. aid, has been engaging with Ethiopian authorities, including the Minister of Peace and Health, and she's been reiterating the importance of working together, the importance of implementing the ceasefire, which is already declared by the government to be accepted by the TPLF force, and also the withdrawal of the TPLF force from portions of places in Amhara and Afar regional state, as well as the Amhara forces withdrawing from Western Tigray. But in general terms, the presser might be evolving around the reiteration of the government's commitment when it comes to the delivery of humanitarian services in the Tigray regional state, also commitment for peace to resolve the northern conflict peacefully. So there is a good news coming from Sudan, for instance, from France, calling for negotiations, roundtable negotiations to happen. So we might be hearing this kinds of positive news coming out, but we should wait and see if that's going to be the case or not in the coming few hours.
William, let's bring you back here. What are your thoughts on the reports that are saying that the Ethiopian government is suspending operations of 2 international aid organizations working in Tigray? And this is at a time that reports are saying that aid is needed most in this region. What are your thoughts on that?
The government has suspended the licenses of, I think, MSF Holland and the Norwegian Refugee Council. They say that they've breached various rules and regulations, importation of satellite phones, also accusing them of irresponsible statements or something along those lines. I mean, this is a civil war. in Ethiopia. These are wartime measures and attitudes from the government. They're highly restrictive. You could say draconian. I think the message to the international community and to humanitarian actors is that if you are perceived to not be following and abiding by the government's instructions, and the government is quite willing to take action against you. And the broader context here is that the humanitarian operation and actors within it, UN OCHA, World Food Programme, other entities have been accused of taking a partisan stance and supporting the Tigrayan resistance increasingly by the government and its supporters. There is no truth to those accusations, but of course the humanitarian situation and the conflict situation are very much intertwined. There were restrictions on aid getting to the rebel-held areas in Tigray. That is one of the reasons the humanitarian situation is so bad. And so that action to try and feed people in those rebel-held areas is perceived by some in the government and as being an act of supporting the Tigrayan armed resistance.
Thank you so much to you both. That was CGTN's Guram Chala, who was speaking to us from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, and William Davidson, a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Well, let's turn our attention to Nigeria now, where 25 people were killed by unknown gunmen earlier this week. This is according to local police, who say the attacks took place in the northwestern state of Kaduna. The assaults were on 4 communities in the Kauru district of Kaduna. Authorities report that 68 farms were destroyed, 63 huts were burned to the ground. Muhammad Jalige, a spokesperson for the police in Kaduna, says the death toll might increase as police survey the area. The military and other security agencies have been deployed to contain the renewed cycle of violence in Kaduna State. Well, CGTN's Deji Badmus is in Lagos and joins us now for more on that story. Deji, thank you so much for joining us. What more can you tell us, Deji, about these attacks?
Well, Hannah, what I can tell you is that that area, Kaduna State particularly, that area where this attack happened has a history of herders-farmers clashes. I mean, we've seen these clashes in the past, and what the authorities are saying is this is just a continuation of it. Suspected herders actually invaded 4 communities, 4 villages in that local government, Kauru local government area. And what we understand from eyewitnesses now, they said these herders just opened fire on anyone they sighted. But there is still no conclusion now as to the number of persons killed. The Kaduna State government itself says only 6 persons were killed. But of course, as you reported, the police is saying about 25 were killed. But the Kaduna State government says 6. Of course, the death toll, according to the Kaduna State government, might still go up. But this is a result of herders-farmers clashes that area is actually notorious for. Hannah?
Can you tell us more about how the government and its security agencies are dealing with these latest attacks? And is it yet known who is behind these attacks?
Well, look, these attacks are essentially carried out by bandits, especially, I just mentioned herders, for instance. What the government is doing is to deploy military resources. In that state, for instance, and that's quite a surprise for a lot of people, because that state is actually home to a lot of units of the Nigerian military, and the military is heavily deployed in the state. But the truth is that because of the fact that the military is also fighting Boko Haram in the northeast, and then you have this same banditry issue now in other parts of the northwest as well, not just Kaduna State. We do not have, the Nigerian government doesn't have enough military personnel now to provide security in every part of that state. For instance, Kaduna State is quite vast, and so there's a shortage of military personnel. What the government says it's doing is to recruit more military personnel. Just the other day, the government took delivery of 6 jet fighters from the United States of America. I'm talking about the Super Tucano aircraft. We understand those aircraft have now been deployed. They are going after the bandits and insurgents as well. But of course, It's really a challenging time for the Nigerian military because the military is stretched out thin. You have crises not just in the north of the country, you also have it in the south of the country. For instance, you go to the southeast, you have the problem of the indigenous people of Biafra. In the southwest, you also have problems. So the military is stretched very thin, and we do not have enough personnel to deal with this security crisis. And that is why security experts have said what the government needs to do at this moment is to speed up recruitment of personnel to ensure that we have up to the number that you would need now to deal with this kind of challenge, which of course the government says it's doing, as well as trying to acquire more hardware now for the military. But of course, at the moment, it's a challenge. The military is doing its best, but of course, it's not been easy at all dealing with this problem, especially the issue of banditry in the north of the country.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive report. Deji Badmo was speaking to us from Lagos. Well, the World Health Organization has released its surveillance report on attacks on healthcare workers in 17 conflict areas around the world. According to recorded data, more than 700 healthcare workers and patients have been killed since December of 2017, while more than 2,000 have been injured in attacks on health facilities. Notula Shabalala brings us more details on that report.
Healthcare workers continue to be the most vulnerable in conflict zones where they serve. That's according to a 3-year data analysis by the World Health Organization. The research looked at 17 emergency-affected countries. These included Ethiopia, Yemen, Syria, Mozambique, Nigeria, the CAR, and Somalia.
Healthcare workers impacted in this study represents 2/3 of all attacks in 2018 and 2019, and 50% of all recorded incidents in 2020. And this is compared to some of the other variables of attacks on the system, which includes the medical supplies, the medical assets, and the facility itself. In 2021 to date, 588 incidents of attacks on healthcare have been recorded within 14 countries that are currently impacted by security and emergencies. This too has caused 114 deaths and 278 injuries of healthcare workers and patients.
The WHO presented its findings at a virtual press briefing in Geneva. The health body says it's deeply concerned that hundreds of health facilities have been destroyed or closed in countries like the DRC. Hundreds of health workers have been killed and others injured.
Healthcare workers must be protected, must be respected. Hospitals and healthcare facilities, including the transportation of ambulances, should not be used for military purposes. As essential conditions for the continued delivery of vital healthcare must be given the necessary space. Any reduction in this capacity will interrupt services, result in the loss of resources, deprive vulnerable communities of this urgent care, as well as undermine health systems and jeopardize long-term public health goals.
The report has warned that the impact of attacks on healthcare workers and systems went well beyond endangering health providers. Those who feel the impact the most are the millions of civilians affected by the lack of healthcare services in countries like South Sudan.
The impact of these healthcare attacks goes well beyond claiming lives. The ramification of such attacks, especially in light of COVID-19 response, is significant and alarming. Their impact reverberates on healthcare workers' mental health and willingness to report to work, equally on communities' willingness to seek healthcare, and also drastically reduces resources for responding to a health crisis, amongst others. The ripple effect of a single incident is huge and has a long-lasting impact on the health system at large.
The WHO is calling on all parties in conflict areas to ensure safe working spaces for the delivery of healthcare services. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Well, we're staying with that report, and we're now joined by CGTN's Tesem Akende, who is in Jos, Nigeria, and Patrick Oyet, who is in Juba, South Sudan. Tesem, let's begin with you. Nigeria has been mentioned in the report among the 17 emergency-affected countries where health workers have died. What is the situation on the ground there, Tesem?
Yes, indeed, Nigeria and of course health workers here in Nigeria have been, they're going through very sad times. There have been attacks recently on health institutions where nurses and of course medical doctors have been picked with ransom demanded from the management before they are released. It's a very bad situation. They are just health workers, but that is an extension to the situation generally here. Beyond the physical assault and the whisking away of of health workers, there is also the emotional attack. I was interacting with some of them last month, and they told me that, look, as health workers in Nigeria, it's such a bad situation. And many of them are actually leaving the country. The Nigerian Medical Association in a report said 8 out of 10 of them are actually leaving due to these circumstances. I interacted with one of them who told me that, look, if he had the opportunity, he would also leave. Beyond that, there's also the issue, there are also issues of poor pay for them. There are also issues of lack of personal protective equipment, especially with COVID-19 in place. So it's such a bad system, it's a bad situation, and they are insisting that, look, if something is not done, they will continue to leave the country. At the moment, we have the resident doctors in the country down in tools. They are on strike, and they say it's indefinite, and they are assuring that it will remain so until their demands for a better and improved health situation about their welfare, about their security, and other issues are actually addressed. If not, the strike will continue indefinitely.
Well, let's turn over to South Sudan, where Patrick is standing by for us. Patrick, there's been an increase in attacks on health and aid workers in South Sudan. Why is that the case?
Yes, Hannah, the UN has released a lot of reports of recent, of course, talking of increased attacks on aid workers and also health workers. This is because, of course, this country has been at war for a very long period of time, and many people have arms in their hands. And not only that, even though the peace agreement was signed in 2018, and then the peace implementation started, the peace dividend is not yet really among the people on the ground. Because if you look at people, for example, who fought, the people who are in the front line, you find that they are now still in the camps, in training camps. They have not yet been graduated, so they don't have any peace dividends. They are not being paid salaries. And now you come to the natural disasters that have occurred, for example, flooding, which is taking place in the country. You find that these people have lost livelihoods. They do not have anything. The only thing they have in their hands are guns. So when they see aid workers, they are ready to loot. They are looting to get some food. When they see these health workers, they think they have money. They go and attack them because they think they can get some money. And because of that, you find in some cases, the aid workers, the health workers are being killed. So those are some of the reasons as to why we are seeing an increase in this issue of health workers being killed, aid workers being killed. And remember, this is also a country where it has been in war for long. The problem of unemployment is there. The government has people whom it has employed. The civil servants are not getting their regular salaries. Many are now unemployed. They don't have sources of livelihood, and then they go looting, they go attacking aid workers.
Tesem, let's bring it back to you in Nigeria. Patrick, I'll be back with you in a moment. Tesem, how is the Nigerian government responding to the attacks on healthcare workers, and do you expect the situation to improve?
Well, the President Muhammadu Buhari-led government here in Nigeria has promised to strengthen health institutions. He said that on May 1st, which is Workers' Day here in Nigeria. Beyond them, he also assured improved working conditions for other workers as well. to further improve the health institution in Nigeria and, of course, safety of health workers, there's a bill in Parliament at the moment limiting the travel of well-heeled people, government officials, from leaving Nigeria to other countries seeking medical help. The Parliament believes that it is when very influential people who are supposed to be making policies to improve the health system, it is when they live in the country and, receive medical care in the country that the situation will be better. So there's a bill in Parliament to that effect. Of course, the bill also seeks to limit the mass exodus of medical doctors. It's been debated, it's been looked at or frowned at the medical doctors seriously, because they believe that if the system is better and their conditions are better, of course, they won't be leaving the country. So these are measures that are in place by both the executive arm of government and the legislative arm of government, precisely the Senate at the moment.
Patrick, what plans has the South Sudanese government put in place to help improve the situation when it comes to safety of healthcare workers there?
Yeah, the government has said that it does not support the continuous attacks on the aid workers and health workers. It has made some arrests in as far as the suspects who, for example, got involved in these activities. But also we have seen changes in some government officials. For example, we have seen some generals being appointed in some of the troubled states, like, for example, in Warrap and Lake State of South Sudan, where there have been a lot of cases of attacks on aid workers. And since these military generals were appointed to these states, we have seen at least a little bit of reduction in the number of attacks on aid workers and even other health workers. And the government is insisting that the only proper way it will deal with this issue is to actually expand the peace process, to take it to the ground so that people can have the peace, people can have job opportunities, and then from there this problem will be comprehensively addressed. Of course, the peace process itself, its implementation is moving slower than many people would have expected, but the government is saying it is working to graduate these forces that are in the camps and then go to the local government level and ensure that peace prevails, encourage people to start farming and take care of their own lives. Therefore, this problem would be resolved. Hannah.
Thank you so much for that. CGTN's Desema Kende speaking to us from Jos, Nigeria, and Patrick Oyet was speaking to us from Juba in South Sudan. Well, the World Health Organization is calling for a moratorium on COVID-19 vaccine boosters until at least the end of September. WHO's head, Tedros Ghebreyesus, says the move will enable at least 10% of the population in every country to get vaccinated. Tedros has also raised concern on poorer nations not being able to vaccinate their people, despite accounting for more than half of the world's population.
I understand the concern of all governments to protect their people from the Delta variant. But we cannot and we should not accept countries that have already used most of the global supply of vaccines, using even more of it, while the world's most vulnerable people remain unprotected. Even while hundreds of millions of people are still waiting for their first dose, some rich countries are moving towards booster doses. So far, more than 4 billion vaccine doses have been administered globally. More than 80% have gone to high and upper middle income countries, even though they account for less than half of the world's population.
Meanwhile, the United States has rejected WHO's appeal for a moratorium on administering COVID-19 vaccine booster shots. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the United States has sufficient supply to continue distributing shots abroad while also ensuring that every American can be fully vaccinated.
We believe we can do both. We also, in this country, have enough supply to ensure that every American has access to a vaccine. We will have enough supply to ensure if the FDA decides that boosters are recommended for a portion of the population, to provide those as well. We believe we can do both, and we don't need to make that choice.
We're now joined by Dr. Bharat Pakania, Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School in Bath in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. What can you tell us about the vaccine booster doses and why they are being used?
looks like the United States, Europe have got the supplies of the vaccines, and they justify its use because they've been able to buy such large numbers of vaccines. And there isn't a clear-cut evidence that boosters are needed, but nevertheless, the booster program is being implemented. I'm not saying it's wrong. All I'm saying is that are they really needed compared to immunizing the rest of the world where they are desperately needed?
Doctor, why do you think, we've talked about it a little bit in our previous report, but why do you think the WHO is asking the West to stop administering the booster shots?
Because we are not well until everyone else is well too. This is a global pandemic, and for Europe and the United States to race ahead with continuing to look after its population at no regard for Africa, Asia, South America is a failing. Remember, there is little evidence that boosters are needed, but there is a lot of evidence that a primary course of vaccines is desperately needed in Africa, South America, and Asia. And it would be much better to say, with regard to the extra vaccines that we have bought, we are going to donate them to the other countries. And on top of that, wake up and allow other parts of the world to also manufacture the vaccines, which Europe and Australia have also been opposing.
Doctor, how do you foresee this vaccine booster campaign impacting vaccination across the African continent?
Well, the unfortunate realization is that whilst Europe and United States are protecting and then extra protecting their population, the countries of Africa have been left to fend for themselves, which is a tragedy, because it also exemplifies that the World Health Organization could be a lot stronger, a lot more robust, and better supported by the richer nations. It is very clear to see that the WHO is not fully supported by the very rich, high technology nations, because otherwise they would be doing the immunization in other parts of the world instead of boosting when it is not necessarily needed.
Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Dr. Pakanya. Dr. Bharat Pakanya, Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter Medical School in Bath, the UK. Let's now take a short break and return. More news making headlines, including South Sudan security stakeholders streamline provision of efficient security and aid. And Iran's Raisi to take office after endorsement from Supreme Leader.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. The stakeholders in South Sudan are working to improve access to people in need of humanitarian assistance and security. This is particularly important in areas where communal violence and a lack of infrastructure has left many people vulnerable. CGTN's Daniela Pearson brings us the details.
Stakeholders have been meeting in Juba to discuss security matters affecting the country. Involved in the deliberations are government officials, security forces, and the UN mission in South Sudan.
Even if we encounter differences of approach and points of difference in the past, working together with respect for each other's responsibilities will make us stronger.
This workshop is very central for trust building and for us to be able to open a new page in how to coordinate our activities between various institutions of security of our country and the United Nations mission in South Sudan.
Authorities have raised concerns over challenges faced by peacekeepers and humanitarian agencies during missions. Their work involves reaching people that need protection, food, and medical supplies, among other urgent assistance. Officials say that a common effort to streamline security is needed.
It could only be possible because of very close interactions, regular visits all around, by building mutual trust, by sharing the information at every level, leaders and staff, and solving any challenges amicably through discussion and dialogue.
We are, as a force, much more mobile than we've ever been. Our patrols are going out all over the country to protect civilians wherever they may be threatened. And the level of threat has spread throughout the country, and it's necessary for us to have that access.
A need for quick action was prompted after thousands of people fled their homes following armed attacks in the western Equatoria region. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Well, humanitarian aid is drying up in Somalia. 5.9 million people are at risk of losing access to life-saving assistance. That has prompted the government to issue an appeal for funding to international donors and other well-wishers. In a statement, the government of Somalia says it is concerned by the humanitarian crisis. Nearly half the population of Somalia, including children and women, face hunger. Drought and floods in the country have recently increased, a situation worsened by climate change, COVID-19, and the worst desert locust infestation in years. Well, for more on that, we're now joined by Praveen Ngala, Interim Regional Director for the Horn, East and Central Africa at Oxfam International, and joins us from Johannesburg. Thank you so much for joining us, Praveen. What is the status of famine and hunger in Africa, and what are the major causes?
Thank you so much for having me. Indeed, the situation is dire on the continent. In our report, in Oxfam's report last year, we indicated that hunger would actually be more dire than COVID-19 in terms of impact. And what we've seen globally is that 20 million people have been pushed to extreme hunger levels in over 155 million, on 55 countries of 155 million people. On the continent, we do have several hotspots that we are monitoring. For example, Ethiopia, DRC, South Sudan, and the Sahel, where on average we have we're monitoring the hunger levels as having increased by approximately 45%. What are the causes, really, you ask? I think we've put them, we're calling them the three triple lethal Cs: climate, COVID, and conflict. Climate is on top of COVID-19 on account of the fact that it's driving a lot of some of the issues which become exacerbated by COVID-19. And also the fact that many of our governments have prioritized responding to COVID as opposed to the climate crisis. There's been an increase in climate-related damage. And for the continent, as you mentioned earlier, that for instance, in East Africa, after we had the cyclones, we had desert locusts that really, impacted many farmers by eating up a lot of crop. Millions of hectares of crop were damaged. So that for us is one of the areas we feel is driving the hunger situation on the continent. The other bit is on COVID. COVID-19 has indeed for us exacerbated the economic fallout on the continent. Part of this is attributed to the business closures, the lockdowns, the measures being taken to circumvent the spread of COVID-19. And what we've seen is that it's resulted in an increase of approximately 16% increase in poverty. And with it, especially certain groups, women, people living in informal settlements, the urban poor, especially those working in small and medium enterprises. So that's another bit. The other one is actually on conflict. We've been listening today to several issues, several concerns around conflict. Last year, On the background of COVID-19 pandemic, the UN called for a ceasefire globally, but we have noticed indeed that unfortunately the conflicts have continued unabated. In the region, there's various countries that we are monitoring. We've got Ethiopia, we've got DRC, we've got South Sudan, we've got the Sahel. So there's various areas where conflict in itself becomes a driver of the hunger crisis. As an example, for instance, in Ethiopia, according to the recent IPC analysis, 350,000 people are at risk of facing famine-like conditions because of the fact that they're unable to access their farmland and indeed farm.
Thank you so much for all that, Praveen Ngala, Regional Director, the Horn East and Central Africa at Oxfam International. Well, let's head over to the Mediterranean, where wildfires continue to rage in Greece with record heat. Fast-moving flames have forced thousands of people to flee from their homes. Evangelos Tsipsas reports from Athens.
Crews and volunteers continue to battle wildfires north of the Greek capital, Athens, for the second day in a row. Here in Varipopi, thousands were forced to flee as flames burned down their houses overnight, while temperatures continued to soar around 40 degrees Celsius, exacerbating the situation. The fire broke out on Tuesday around 20 kilometers north of Athens, forcing the evacuation of thousands of people, while others in nearby neighborhoods were advised to stay indoors. The blaze quickly spread to nearby areas, burning down farms, threatening livestock and properties. 500 firefighters, volunteers, trucks, and over a dozen planes and helicopters have been mobilized to try to bring the fire under control. The main highway connecting Athens to central and northern Greece remains closed. Authorities were able to evacuate the area and bring many to safety, while their properties and vehicles have been ravaged by the flames.
I have goosebumps just talking about it. All the homes around me burned, nothing's left. There were explosions all around. The utility poles were falling, there were explosions inside homes and cars. It was like we were in Hiroshima.
The Greek Prime Minister has visited the area to encourage the firefighters and volunteers and to see for himself the damage.
We will start immediately recording the damages. Houses will be rebuilt. With time, we will replant the forest. We still have difficult days ahead, with the continued heat wave and more high winds, so I encourage everyone to be vigilant.
Fire brigade officials warned that the blaze that broke out on Tuesday was the worst out of 81 wildfires recorded in the last 24 hours. Helped by lower winds and humidity overnight, firefighters were able to reduce 4 fire fronts to 1. But authorities are warning due to high winds and high temperatures expected in the next few days, the situation could get worse. Evangelos Tsipsas for CGTN, Athens, Greece.
Your business news after the short break. Here's what's coming up. The Southern African Development Community's economic growth rate contracted by 4.8% in 2020. And the IMF approves allocation of about $3.4 billion to Nigeria to boost economic recovery.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Time now for business news. The Southern African Development Community's economic growth rate contracted by 4.8% in 2020. That's according to a report released by the Regional Group's Secretariat. With more on that report, here's CGTN's Angela Coppola.
Regional annual inflation increased to an average of 49.6% in 2020, from 16.4% in 2019, largely due to heightened inflationary pressures in Zimbabwe. The region's current account balance widened from an average deficit of 4.2% in 2019 to 4.7% in 2020.
The COVID pandemic has hit the region hard, and we were coming from a slowdown previously in terms of growth. If you look at the figures from 2011, 2012, the growth has been slowing down.
Economic prospects for the bloc remain pessimistic, as the region still depends on the natural resources, agriculture and mining sectors for growth.
You are looking at the domestic scenario whereby production is still being impacted by the COVID itself. Because of these measures, you have to limit the production. But on the demand side, you are also faced with the challenge of the supply chains being broken. And that will drag on for the next 2-3 years. Who knows?
While the medium-term view remains pessimistic, there are opportunities. But some work first needs to be done on in-country industrial development to exploit external opportunities.
Do we have the product to sell to this market? That's why I'm saying that I'm pessimistic, because the approach which is necessary to address the current scenario in the medium, even to the long term, sustainably, it depends on addressing the structures of our economies by developing the industrial sector through value chain development.
SADC has all the plans in place. It now needs to implement them in order to grow economically. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Nigeria plans to take advantage of a fund allocated by the International Monetary Fund to boost its struggling economy. The IMF has set aside an estimated $3.4 billion to help Nigeria recover from the effects of COVID-19. Reporting from Abuja, here is Phil Ehaza.
The fund, called Special Drawing Rights or SDRs, is drawn from the IMF's reserve to make emergency loans available so that developing nations like Nigeria can shore up their currency reserves without the need to borrow at high interest rates. According to IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, the entire SDR approved for all countries is worth an equivalent of $650 billion and is the largest ever allocation from the IMF's reserves. She says the historic decision was born out of the desire by the IMF to assist global economies at a time of unprecedented crisis. The aim is to boost global liquidity at a time when the world is struggling with the coronavirus pandemic. Africa's largest economy bounced back from a recession in February as a result of the easing of pandemic restrictions. Since then, the government has been intensifying efforts to diversify its crude oil-dependent economy to revamp other sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, health and transportation. According to the IMF, the general allocation of SDRs will become effective on August 23. Phil Ehaza, CGTN, Abuja.
An update on what's happening in the world of sport after the short break. Here's what's coming up. Peruth Chemtai makes history in Tokyo as she becomes the first female to win Uganda an Olympic gold medal.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
We begin with Uganda's history maker, Ruth Chemutai, who became the first female Olympic gold medalist in the country's history. The 22-year-old won the women's 300-meter steeplechase star-studded final on Wednesday. Here's CGTN's Leon Senyange with the reaction from Kampala.
Social media platforms were abuzz congratulating Ruth Chemutai, who pulled off a remarkable and well-calculated race, edging out the USA's Courtney Frerichs and Kenya's Heaven Kiyeg, who took silver and bronze respectively. The 3,000-meter steeplechase final featured the world's top 8 runners and offered no definite leader from the gun. Chemutai, however, pulled through to lead by the second lap. She fell back after Frerichs broke away to create a sizable gap, but that wasn't to last long. Chemutai made her move in the final lap, chasing down Frerichs to cross the finish line in 9 minutes and 1.45 seconds. That is a new national record. More importantly, though, Chemutai wrote her name in Uganda's sports history books. She is the first female to win an Olympic gold medal. Uganda's 2 Olympic golds before Chemutai's victory had come from Jonah Kibwa at the 1972 Munich Games and Stephen Kiprotich at the London Games in 2012. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Kenya's long wait for gold ended after Emmanuel Korir clinched Kenya's first gold medal in the men's 800-meter final on Tuesday. Korir clocked 1 minute 45.06 seconds to finish ahead of compatriot Ferguson Rutich and Polish Patryk Dobek in second and third, respectively. Korir surged forward past Dobek and Australian Peter Paul at the sound of the bell and held on for a first medal at Global Championship. The victory comes just days after he was eliminated from the preliminary round of the men's 400 meters following a false start. Rutich, on his part, had to summon all his energy in the last 70 meters to come from behind and finish ahead of Dobek and Paul for a Kenya 1-2.
Actually, I knew everyone was tough. My focus actually was to run the last 150 meters. If anything happens, because I never expected the race to be slow. So I thought maybe we're gonna run the fastest time ever, but no one was willing to carry the cross in the first 400. So I did it. I controlled the pace, did my best, and the Australian guy, Mr. Paul, tried to control the last 300 meters. And I said to myself, let me just try push the last 100 meters and see if I will make it.
When I was on straight 100 meters, I was out of the bracket. But I remember that I have to be in the podium. So, and that came to be true.
As Kenyan athletes compete in the Olympic Games, upcoming athletes are calling on authorities at home to expedite the completion of sporting facilities in the Rift Valley province. The area is renowned worldwide for producing top athletes, but as CGTN Sadiq Shaban found out, there is still a lot of work to be done.
This is a common sight across many high-altitude areas of Kenya's Rift Valley region. These endurance sessions on their own are not enough, at least for middle-distance runners who need artificial surfaces for their speed work. For 3 years, CGTN has documented the status of key sporting facilities in Kenya's 3 main athletics regions ahead of the 2020 Olympic Games. Nandi County has produced top athletes in the world, and this is the situation of the municipal stadium. The facility is now a grazing field for livestock after falling into a state of disrepair. The nearby Kipchoge Keino Stadium is incomplete and construction has stopped for the last 1 year. The stadium has been shut down, but the government says it will complete the project.
Promises are there, like now in Iten. An upcoming athlete will have to travel all the way to Eldoret, come back. They don't have source of income. They don't have any jobs to do.
In Uasin Gishu County, athletes are still waiting for the completion of the city's main facility. The construction works here began 10 years ago and remains unfinished.
This ground surface is rough and rocky. It has debris that can inflict an injury to an athlete.
If we had a good stadium, some of us will not have to travel to Eldoret or Tambach for training. Training here has gone down.
That was a plea from upcoming athletes 3 years ago. The Cameroon Stadium in Iten, the most famous athletics track in Kenya, has remained undone for years despite producing world and Olympic champions. Hopes for a new world-class facility were high when construction began 2 years ago. But after a short period, this is the current state of the facility after work stopped due to lack of funds. After years of neglect, some construction works have finally begun here at Cameroon Stadium in Elgeyo-Marakwet County. Now, these renovation works were meant to begin 4 years ago to accord Kenyan athletes ample time to sufficiently prepare for the 2020 Olympic Games in Japan. But even with the postponement of the Games to 2021, this facility is still not yet ready. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN, in Iten, Kenya.
Meanwhile, Tokyo Olympics organizers have reported 31 new games-related COVID-19 cases, bringing the total since July the 1st to 353. Coronavirus infections are surging faster than ever before,